Okay.
For my second video for the Learning from YouTube course, I'm going to perform for you a paper that I delivered in May at an academic conference called the International Communications Association Meetings. The paper is called Queer Realism on YouTube, and a more refined, longer, in-depth version of this paper will be published in the book Rethinking Documentary, edited by Thomas Austin out of McGraw-Hill in 2008. Okay, I'll admit it. The fact of this talk withstanding, I have been actively avoiding YouTube. Granted, every few months I have followed through on a link generously offered up to me by a friend or a net acquaintance. I inevitably land on some humorous confection, mocking a piece of mainstream culture I never saw in the first place, a silly man dancing out the history of American music, or two otters holding hands, some kid coming out in his bedroom, two voluptuous long-haired fake-breasted babes making out in a hotel room. If I travel a little lower down the list, I only find more of the same. But hoping for something just a little more interesting, I'll try a key word of some value to me, say queer realism, which would certainly help with this paper. But there are no videos to be found under such a bookish term. Queer works, but what emerges feels of little more use to me than the blonde honeys I got on the first pass. I am assaulted primarily by clips from, parodies of, or interviews with cast members of Queer as Folk, Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, The L Word, or music videos from a band called Garbage with a song called Queer, accompanied by posts that say, "I love this video and song," and "I want Shirley Manson to rape me." An avid consumer of media, I have much better things to see and quickly go to them. Independent lesbian features, experimental gay videos, activist AIDS media. For me, the banality of this revolution is far more notable than its populism. So yes, I've been actively avoiding YouTube. This even as it is the realization of many of the hopes that I hold most dear. These highly anticipated, if perhaps idealistic dreams for democratic media were written about and sometimes attempted by a host of media scholars and makers whose art and theory I most cherish. Across the 100-year history of the moving recorded arts, radical media theorists and makers have predicted a soon-to-pass utopia where expanded access to the production, distribution, and exhibition of media might reign. This a magnificent future where consumers would become producers because they could at last afford the means of production and distribution, where they could document the look, feel, and meat of their daily lives, then add their voices and everyday experiences to the public sphere, and participate in the production of culture without the expertise bought at film schools. In the past, through the work of radical media makers, we've caught glimpses of this place for sure. The deconstructive realism of the third cinema, peeks at the interior realities caught by the Bolexes of the bohemians of the new American cinema, or the unapologetic, ironic, and often nasty gays and lesbians of the new queer cinema. And as a member of this radical tradition of media praxis myself, a tradition of making and theorizing media as in connection to a political project of world or self-changing, I have even anticipated and sometimes contributed to my own pie-in-the-sky visions about a time and its supportive technologies when realist production about the lived world might take on the significant role it deserves in media and world culture. Among other goals, I have sought for expanded queer realism through my work with and about alternative AIDS media in the 1980s and new queer cinema in the 1990s. And much of what we anticipated for those movements I find today on YouTube, that unruly place I've been so actively avoiding. So while it might be easiest and most self-incriminating to say that even with all this queer media at my fingertips, lectures at gay and lesbian centers, floats from protest marches, fashion shows, I have still refused to really go there because it turns out that I'm an overeducated media snob who can't bear the tedium of truly popular culture. In my paper today, while owning up to my disdain for Queer Eye and even the L World, I'd like to suggest that my problem is much more than personal. Instead, I will name some of the ways that queer realist practice on YouTube fails me and us, even as it delivers much we once desired. My method will be highly academic. I will hold queer realist practices, just one tiny thread on YouTube, to the dictums, theories, and shared assumptions from the queer traditions of radical media praxis that anticipated it. I will ask how queer video on YouTube continues, breaks from, perverts, or improves upon cultural production and associated theoretical writing produced by previous generations of queer artists and activists that linked their art forms to political transformation. My method presupposes that new media models itself upon and learns from old, and that cultural producers learn from and build upon associated histories and traditions. My model is academic because it assumes that we make better media when we are serious students of what has been made before us. And YouTube is not academic. Like cinema in its prehistory, there's a gee willikers enthusiasm for the fact of production in and of itself, as if its staple shorts, either overly sincere or glibly ironic realist clips about popular culture or personal satisfaction, or auto-generous, as if they are unrelated to a history of images before them and spring instead from the newly accessible technology. More critically, the delivery platform is decidedly atheoretical. By this I do not mean highfalutin, obscure, opaque writing by continental philosophers and their acolytes, even as I did begin this talk indicating the function that highbrow snobbery will play in my critique. Rather, I subscribe to a worldview built upon the belief that regular people who make media to change the world also should make theory, that they can and must make systematic claims about the culture they produce and consume, because from these regularized claims, more powerful production ensues. As far as queer video goes, I love this video and song helps me not at all. I want Shirley Manson to rape me, even less so. What I need, as does any political movement with a media component, is self-aware writing that creates a social, political, intellectual, and aesthetic context and structure for understanding work, and for connecting it to other work, present and past, and then most critically, relating the work on display to contemporary claims and acts bent upon changing the world. While this might sound like I'm asking for too much, I have learned that the integration of a theoretical practice with a media practice is definitive of and integral to media praxis, that is, media that is made in connection to an articulated project of world and self-changing. For instance, in Queer Cinema, the Film Reader, the first paragraph of the general introduction explains that queer film cannot be understood outside of queer theory, an approach to rethinking human sexuality that sustains the film work produced, the critical writing about it, and the communities served and hailed by this integrated body of cultural production. Activist rants, bits and pieces of queer television, hot guys kissing on a gay pride float, each of these stand-alone snatches of queer realist media practice, each of these isolated and solo spectacles found on YouTube, are not the stuff of a political or film movement,